Hello, and welcome to another UTC audio and video commentary track. This is Jim Whaley, and today I'll be walking us through Chapter 12, the Mother Trilogy. This commentary is a little bit overdue. I'm in the process of finishing the last few pages of the next chapter, number 13. I won't be spoiling anything from that chapter in this commentary, so don't worry about that. We're just going to be talking about this chapter, how it relates to the previous chapters, and fun behind-the-scenes stuff. At least I hope it's fun. It'll be fun for me. Hope it's fun for you. So let's dig right into this. We're going to start with the cover. This cover may be familiar to anyone who's taken a look at or purchased, thank you very much, the first volume of UTC. The composition for this cover was tough for me at the beginning because I really wasn't sure what to do visually with the cover. This story is unique in that it's split into three completely independent sub-chapters. There's a focus for Jen and Katsuko and Billy, and their stories are very brief, and they don't blend into each other. So unifying them into one image was, at first I thought, going to be a real challenge, until after a while it dawned on me that I could sort of treat this like if this were a TV show and there was like a quirky one-off episode. Sometimes a TV show will do a gimmick where they'll change their opening credit sequence for that episode to match in universe. There's a lot of fun examples of it on TV. The ones that stuck in my mind and that I can recall right now are the Star Trek Enterprise two-parter In a Mirror Darkly, where they spent the entirety of the two-parter in the mirror universe. So the opening credits were even designed as if Star Trek existed in the mirror universe. They completely changed the look of the opening, and it was one of the best episodes of that entire series, and part of it is just because of the fact that they went there. They went and changed the entire credit sequence. The other one I can think of is the Torchwood episode where that fake extra cast member is in it for an episode. I think his name is Adam. And in the intro exposition sequence, they spliced in some footage of Adam hanging out with the Torchwood crew as if he's always been in the show, which is a fun little way to clue the audience in right at the beginning that something's not right in this episode. Anyway, so that was kind of when I realized what I wanted to do with this, something that felt right. What if these side characters just take over UTC for the day, which is what's happening, and they're literally replacing the main cast members. So I stole the composition from the first volume trade paperback, which collects the first 4 chapters of UTC. So this one has the full cast in it, sets up the premise for the show. A little exaggerated because there's no helicopter. So like a lot of the elements in this cover, I went and transposed. So Cass's mom takes her place on the cover, and each individual section for each one sort of goes hand in hand with the situation that they face in the story. So Billy is transforming half into a flying squirrel and half into a goat, which matches where her character arc starts to go in her chapter. Katsuko is holding a teddy bear, and Jen is playing with a doll. And I made this look obnoxiously pink and yellow because I needed this to look like a dollhouse. I don't know if it reads that way that well. If Jen looks like she's a giant, I mean, she's supposed to be normal sized, and the implication is that Katsuko and Billy are shrunk down to the size of dolls, which does not happen in the story, and I believe that I disappointed some readers that there isn't actually any shrinking or like anything like that in this chapter. That was a risk that I took just because I liked the premise of the cover. I'm gonna say, if you're upset with me that this chapter didn't involve shrinking and Jen playing with the characters as if they're dolls, you're right to be disappointed with me because that's a really fun concept. Maybe at one point we'll explore that somehow. I'm not sure when, but that's valid. So anyway, that's where this cover came from. And once I figured out how I wanted the cover to look, that everything pretty much clicked into place. I'm not really happy with the angle of the dollhouse, but that's really me getting super technical. The angle of Attic High here is really steep, and I didn't quite transpose it that well in the frame, which I could have, but that's like that's my one regret with this cover. So, yeah, let's just go ahead and get into... Oh, the other thing, some people were wondering what this all is on Jen's shirt. I don't know myself. This is just supposed to be vague text, and that's a smiley face. I just tried to think of some kitty shirt they could have grabbed for Jen to wear out of, like, an old storage closet. Jen and Sin have 3 kids. So they were all young at one point or another. They've probably got a massive trove of clothes that they haven't already donated to charity or anything. So, yeah, I'm not really sure what this is myself. I just wanted something that looked like a child's hand-me-down shirt. So, we're going to start things off with Jen's chapter. Everyone got a sort of intro title kind of here. Another thing that I was conscious about as I was designing the chapter was, because we're going to have 3 completely separate chapters, but they're not going to have a cover like this to break each of them up, I wanted something to show, okay, there's a new chapter starting. And yes, every chapter ends with a little box that says "The End" in the corner, but it's really unobtrusive and you may miss it. So to cap off each first page of the new chapters, I borrowed a page from Will Eisner, who was famous for incorporating the title of his comics into the mise-en-scène, or the imagery, the in-world background of the comic itself. So, taking that as an inspiration, I thought, well, I could put the names of each focus character in the background or the foreground, or incorporate it in some way so that you could see their name, and that's like, okay, so this is Jen's chapter. So that's what we've got with trombone here and the little spelling blocks. So, yeah, I'm going to resist the urge to just go ahead and read through every single panel. The last commentary was 2 hours. I had a lot to talk about, a lot of heavy topics and stuff. This commentary is going to be much lighter. These chapters themselves are much lighter. These were a breeze to make. I had an absolute blast making this chapter. So, I suppose I could just go ahead and talk about the setup for why the 3 sub-chapters. Why are we focusing on the side characters? A close friend of mine who had been reading the comic for a very long time, in the middle of the class warfare arc, and part 1, we hadn't even gotten into the major battle sequences in part 2 yet, but this was like late 2014, early 2015, and this friend came to me and said, "Hey, look, I haven't been keeping up on your comic, and it's partly because there's a current arc going on. I'd really like to just wait till the arc's over." And I said, "I'm sorry, you're going to have to wait a long time, because it's going to be a 2-parter. It's going to be long. I don't know when I'm going to finish the second part, probably next year." It turned out it would take me 4 more years, but I didn't know that at the time. And we had a long conversation that was really enlightening to me about how other people read the comic. Like, I had a lot of future thinking ideas, whether it's going to be a story that I know I'm going to put in the comic at some point, or if it's a story I plan for the comic at some point. I've got a lot of extra ideas in my head that none of the readers are aware of. So I have a different perspective of where the characters are at, what the characters appear to be to you as the reader. And turned out there was a big disconnect there, where I know a lot more about the reader. I know a lot more about the characters and their current states of mind than you do. And because everything's been pretty much full tilt for so long, like Cass turns into a goat, Flint turns into a squirrel, Noah's slowly turning into a salamander, Morty's evil, now he's kind of good. The whole school thing just blew up. And we had some chapters that weren't even at the school, so we missed a lot of developments at the school that led up to the class warfare rebellion. there were a lot of things that I sort of just breezed through. And for some readers, that really was a lot. It was a marathon to just go through and not have a moment to breathe, not have a moment where the characters are not having, like, not where the characters aren't in a life-threatening situation, or where the characters aren't immediately dealing with the fallout of a recent transformation. There weren't any breather episodes. So after having a conversation with my friend, I sat back and I thought, yeah, UTC definitely needs to take a break. The characters deserve a break, and the readers, especially if the readers aren't really becoming acquainted, if the readers aren't able to really understand what the quote-unquote status quo is. There really isn't a status quo in this comic, but there at least needs to be some semblance of what is happening between pages. And so this idea of, okay, let's take a look at the characters in their daily lives, that's where that came about. And I immediately set about writing one of the chapters. It wasn't this one, it was Billy's chapter. That was the very first thing I wrote. I wrote that back in 2015. And it's largely the same as when I first wrote it, as they are the final pages now. At that point, 5 years, there was a 5-year gap between when I wrote the script for those pages and when I finished those pages and posted them. But they're largely unchanged, and I really enjoyed that chapter. I got some feedback from some other friends about it, and it was pretty good feedback. And so at that point, I'm like, this is going to be a good thing for the comic to add these chapters in. So from there, I used that Billy chapter as the gold standard, and then started thinking about what other characters I wanted to focus on. And the characters that I thought about doing a chapter with Ash and Demetrius. I thought about doing just a chapter with who else? It's been so long, I honestly can't remember what else I seriously considered. I thought about another Flint chapter. Originally, it was going to be, the Billy chapter was going to be the only one where the main characters weren't the focus. Because obviously, like, if you're following the main characters, you want to learn more about the main characters' daily lives. Let's focus on a quiet day with the main characters. Like, let's see how Cass is still trying to figure out, like, how to live day to day with her goat transformation, or let's see what Noah does. We don't see a whole lot of Noah, but I started gravitating toward other characters that we didn't even see a lot of focus of during the other chapters. So I thought about Katsuko. Like, she has not gotten, like, what she hasn't gotten the focus she really deserves as a secondary character. Slowly, I've been giving her more focus and more things to do, but we still haven't really had a story where she was really the central character. She's always supporting somebody else, either in an A plot or a B plot. So I thought, let's give her an actual chapter in this. It's her time. She deserves it. And she deserves more than this even. But there really wasn't, with the other plans I have for phase 3, this was really just like, I'm going to give her as much as I can. So then I thought about Jen. Like, we just saw Jen transform into a toddler. Let's take a look at what that is like for her. Because again, there are things where, like, I want to make sure that you guys get to see some of this stuff before we continue on with her story and how much more she'll be able to do in the rest of phase 3. How much longer will it be before we check in again on her? This felt like a very good time. Like, this just happened. We just finished the class warfare arc. This story takes place just 2 days later. So she is still getting used to this new dynamic where she's this tiny little child compared to her husband. Her husband's kissing her on the cheek, not on the lips, because there's all sorts of connotations there that we are absolutely not getting into. And now she has to babysit Trombone, who is ostensibly just a year or two younger than she is. 3. I haven't exactly set an age for what Jen appears to be here, but it's between 3 and 5. So probably closer to 3. And Trom is less than a year old. So we've got that going on. So then when I pinned down that it would be Jen and Katsuko and Billy, I started thinking, well, what's the title for the chapter going to be? I wanted to at least have a overarching title that matches everything. And I couldn't think of anything for a long time. The working title for this chapter was just JKB, which is all three of their initials in the order they appear. And then at some point I connected the dots that Jen and Billy are both mothers, and Katsuko kind of is a mom to her teddy bears. She uses mommy as a code word in some of her verbal commands on her watch to them and things like that. So I'm like, okay, that's like the best thread that I can find that strings these three characters together. So let's make the stories themselves all revolve around motherhood in some way. Billy's story already did. That was already in there. It was baked into the original script that I wrote. With Jen, it was pretty easy to come up with an idea for, well, okay, let's see Jen try to be a mother to her youngest child and see how much harder it is for her now that she has the body of a child. And then with Billy, that one I'll get to that in a few pages, in a little more detail. So when I realized that motherhood was like the theme, I then thought, well, the Mother Trilogy is the perfect title. And what really sold that for me was that it also, in a completely unrelated reference, it refers to a trilogy of Nintendo games from the late 80s, early 90s. In Japan, they were called Mother, Mother 2, and Mother 3. They were an RPG series. When they were imported to the US, Mother 2 was imported first, and Nintendo renamed it Earthbound for North America and other Western markets. And they didn't release Mother 1 or Mother 3 here. It wasn't until the mid-2010s that Nintendo imported the original Mother 1, which they called Earthbound Origins. And to this date, for many reasons, there's lots of speculation. I'm definitely not going to go into it here because it doesn't matter. I'm spending too much time talking about this reference as it is. Mother 3 has never been imported to Western markets. So it's like become this infamous boondoggle that Nintendo is never going to give Nintendo fans outside of Japan the full Mother Trilogy. So the idea of me being like, okay, I'm going to call this the Mother Trilogy, and I'm going to release all three parts, and that'll be me one-upping Nintendo. So that's a little extra cheeky reference in there. Which also goes into the fact that I was really playing that up at the end of the last chapter when I had that little, instead of having the end in the last page of Class Warfare, I had next, the Mother Trilogy. I really wanted to drive that home, like, hey guys, check this gimmicky title I came up with for the comic. Alright, so that is, I hope, the deepest cut of this commentary. I'm going to try to keep the rest of this focused on UTC. Alright, so yes, we've got Jen having to babysit Trombone. So this entire thing was designed as a Looney Tunes cartoon. There's heavy influence from the Roger Rabbit theatrical short. The Who Framed Roger Rabbit movie, they also made a theatrical short, and I think it came out in front of Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. Or at least it's on the VHS tape of Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. But it's an in-universe short of Roger and Baby Herman, and Roger's trying to babysit Baby Herman, and Baby Herman is like, about to like fry his face on with an iron and all this other stuff, and Roger's run ragged trying to keep up with him, and so that's pretty much what this is. It's an homage to that. So. We just have a lot of physical comedy. This is a fun thing for me to do just to exercise my page layout and action skills, because as I've referred to before in the Class Warfare commentaries, action drawing is not my strong suit. So coming up with these funny set pieces, and especially the table sequence here where he's running across a completely set up for Thanksgiving dinner table. That's where I was going with this. So this panel here, used to be, I couldn't figure out how does Trom get this, pot of pumpkin squash soup, which is my favorite type of soup, which is why I put it in here. well, how does he get this down to the point where it's going to crash on him and scald him? And at first, I had drawn this tablecloth all the way to the end of the island, and he was pulling on the tablecloth, and that was pulling the slow cooker. And a reader pointed out that that's incredibly dangerous and irresponsible from a cooking standpoint and a childcare standpoint. So I removed the cloth from here. I shrunk it down to over here. So like this is the half of the table where the guests will serve the soup for themselves and pour the drinks and stuff. But over here, they safely put the slow cooker on the bare countertop so there's no fire hazard. There's still a electrical child hazard here, but that is, at least they're not doing two wrong things at once. So I redrew that for the post-release. So yeah, here Jen, this is kind of like my attempt to show Jen jumping on top of the chair and then using that as a springboard to launch her. So as it's collapsing, she's jumping off onto it. I tried a lot of these things where I have multiple iterations of the same character on the panel at the same time. This was originally sketched out to be 3 of them. There's going to be Jen and Trom here, and then there's going to be a third version of them over here. But I didn't really have the space for it. The way that they scaled, I think Jen's actually a bit too big here. But the way that they scale, I couldn't fit them all in and have the silhouettes read that well. So, especially against these chairs. So I just drew it twice, which I hope that still comes across decently. So then here, this is another redraw. The original angle as this released to the web, this is a more of a 3/4 angle, and it really didn't read that well. You couldn't really tell where Jen and Trom were in relation to the soup pot. It looked kind of like the soup pot was still splashing down right on them. So I redrew this to be side on, so you can see she's really throwing him out of the way in the nick of time, and they're well clear of where the soup is spilling. And this was a very difficult page to draw because I'm a neat freak, and the idea of Trom just tracking soup all over the carpet and getting it on everything on their clothes, like I hated that. But that's, I have to suffer for my craft if I'm going to be doing these hilarious situations. One last thing before we finish off the Jen story is this is the first time you get to see Jen and Sin's oldest son, Simon Thomas, who the Simon Thomas Attic Hall building where the genetics labs are, that's who it's named after, is their oldest son. I've been trying to work him into the comic for a long time. He's a doctor. He's graduated from college, so he's moved away to be somewhere else. He's not at home with them. He's not like a main. He wasn't designed to be a main part of the comic. It was just going to be Karis as a student at Attic High. So I wanted to find. I told myself, soonest opportunity I can to show the rest of the Attic family, I'm going to do that. And having them all assemble for Thanksgiving dinner was the best shot I got. So now that's finished Jen's story. The reason that Jen's story and Katsuko's story are shorter than Billy's, originally my plan for Phase 3 was every chapter was going to have 24 pages. Phase 2, every chapter was exactly 22 pages long. That was me trying to just build it out so that I could print legit comic books and have a trade paperback and just sort of fit the industry standard. And I felt that especially writing the last couple chapters of Phase 2, Fur Will Fly and Class Warfare Part 1, I felt like having a couple of extra issues, or a couple of extra pages per issue would have really helped me expand out the story a bit. And then as I did, as I worked on Class Warfare Part 2, that story kept going on and on and on because I kept realizing, I set up a ton of plot threads and I need to resolve all of them. And I need to give the readers at least some kind of somewhat satisfying battle. So that issue built out to become 36 pages, which is 150% longer than what it was budgeted to be. But because I'm still planning for graphic novels, I want to put all of Phase 3 into one affordable graphic novel, so I want it to be short enough so that readers aren't going to be asked to shell out like $30 to read it. So I kind of went and said, all right, I'm going to steal those extra 12 pages that I drew for chapter 11. I'm going to steal them from all the other subsequent chapters. So all the subsequent chapters that I was planning on being 24 pages, well, they're not going to be anymore. I'm going to have to shorten each of them. And the easiest one to shorten was this one, the Mother Trilogy. I took, there were supposed to be 8 pages for each character. I took 4 from Jen and 2 from Katsuko. So that means that I only have to take 6 pages out of the next 4 chapters. So we're going to have 322, or at least as far as I'm building them out right now, we're going to have 3 chapters that are 22 pages, 1 chapter that'll be 24. And I said I wasn't going to do super geeky deep cuts in this commentary, but at least that deep cut was related to UTC. It wasn't related to some 30-year-old Nintendo game. But anyway, that is the explanation for why these shorts are different lengths. The chapter itself comes out to only 18 pages, which is the shortest chapter since chapter 3 in Phase 1. So that's, by the numbers, that's why that is that way, in case you were at all wondering. So Katsuko, this page was an experiment in trying to do better backgrounds and atmospheric effects. I looked through a bunch of Impressionist paintings of winter outdoors scenes, and I found one that had this really great pastel color palette, lots of pinks and purples to simulate a evening look. So it's dusk right now, so I took those like rough color swatches and I used them to paint out the background here. You can actually see that the line art for the page is just these foreground trees, and the background is just me going in with the brush tool in Photoshop and just painting vague shapes for bushes, shrubbery, and other trees there. I really like how this came out. I'm going to try to do that more in the future. So here's Katsuko's name. This was the hardest to incorporate of all 3 chapters. I didn't really have any like foreground elements to create Katsuko from. I almost had a bunch of branches in the foreground that would spill out the name, but it kind of got in the way of the composition. It would have been here. But with all the word balloons up here, I needed to move it down here, and down here I really didn't like the idea of those branches getting into the composition. And so I'm like, oh, what if it's just, what if it's like contrails from a plane, or just clouds that happen to have her name in it. So that's what they ended up being there. I wanted to get the idea that the military, the National Guard's still stationed here. They've sealed up and they're guarding the building. So the idea that they had to sort of walk around a large gate that the National Guard has apparently built on the premises. They've had to walk through the woods to get to the other side of the building so that they can go across the grounds. So I drew this extra tent over here and stuff so that you could still have this idea of like, okay, yeah, the military still has a presence here. The school's under quarantine, essentially. So we're back in the cafeteria. I told myself I don't ever want to draw this cafeteria again. And then I'm like, well, the easiest way they can sneak in is through one of the windows that the National Guard busted through. So they're going to have to sneak in through the cafeteria. I'm going to have to draw the cafeteria again. So here it is again. So I get to draw a lot of these backgrounds, which I then cover up with word balloons. Here's a tip: if you're ever drawing complex backgrounds, but you also have a page with lots of dialogue, know where your balloons are going to be so that you don't spend forever designing a background with tons of details and then covering it up with a large word balloon. Don't sweat the details there. Like here, I think I did draw some ceiling elements to show where the lights in the ceiling were. It all got covered up anyway, so I might as well not have drawn any of it. So here is like for the first time we're really seeing Katsuko like as a central focus, seeing like what her thought process is. And I was still actually getting acquainted with who the character really is too, because I was writing her as a support character. I wasn't really sure like what is her motivation, like outside of like what her project is. Like she works with teddy bears. She wants to create, bears that can protect kids. Awesome. But like what's her attitude about it? What kind of a person is she outside of just her academia? And I used Toho to like bring out different parts of her. Like she's got a sibling conflict with him, like like lots of siblings do. It's a very simple, common sibling disagreement thing that they've got going on. But I showed both parts of it. I showed her like being upset with him and kind of being like, maybe my bear should actually attack him and then he'll see what's for. And then immediately when she's on the verge of being discovered, she flips back to her more kind-hearted default self, which is like, I just put a bunch of my friends and my brother in danger. This is a really bad idea. So where this idea for the story itself came from, this plot device, this was, and you may remember this from some previous commentaries, while I was finishing Phase 1, I had originally written a 5th chapter, which was called Cotton Stuffed Nightmare. And it was going to be Katsuko's teddy bears all getting out and malfunctioning, and there was going to be this, like, semi-comedic horror storyline where everyone's running around the school, like, frightened of these bears, these adorable, cuddly bears. And things changed. My plan for the 4th chapter, Day of the Dork, that completely upended it, turned into Karis going on another rampage, and a lot of the plot lines of Phase 1 got wrapped up in that chapter, and it became the Cotton Stuff Nightmare chapter simply just became this outlier. It didn't really have a place anymore at that part of the story, but I kept it in my back pocket because I loved the idea. I wanted to do something with it. We got to see a little bit of the teddy bears in Class Warfare. Katsuko actually used them in Class Warfare, so I brought a little bit of those horrific elements back in to the story there. So like the way that the bears are portrayed is kind of really creepy, and like I love the idea of adorable and creepy at the same time. I really like playing with that a lot. So that element has always been a part of the bears from the beginning, and I was happy to bring that out in Class Warfare. And for this chapter, it just made perfect sense to just do a miniature version of the original plot for Cotton Stuffed Nightmare. So when I wrote Class Warfare Part 2, I made sure to write in some lines of dialogue and talk about, okay, so the teddy bear with the camera that we're using to spy on Ken's group, that's going to malfunction somehow. And we're not going to see the bear come back in that chapter. So that bear was written in to be the bear that poses the threat in the Mother Trilogy here. And then I came up with the idea of, well, let's actually have Toho be the one that makes it malfunction, and he breaks Katsuko's control watch. And so, like, that can, like, those can all be elements, story elements that I can set up in Class Warfare and pay off here. So that's what was going on with her and Toho in the previous chapter. And so now we're getting into the horror elements properly here. The idea of Cass and Noah making out in the closet, it's a very out of character moment for them. That was something that I really fought the story to make that go in here. And when you're writing characters and you realize you have to fight what you think their nature is to make them do something out of character, that's always a sign that you're doing something wrong. And I knew I was doing something wrong here by having them just... Cass and Noah have not done anything up to this point in the series to really make us think that they would ever just, like, during an important high-stakes mission for a friend, they would just be derelict in their duty and just go off and start making out. That doesn't make any sense. And the more I thought about it, the more I'm like, well, this kind of is the best thing I can think of to get them off their guard so that the bear can then attack all three of them. So story-wise it works, but character-wise it doesn't. My loose justification is that this is their animal instincts taking over, and I added dialogue to the end of this chapter where they talk about Cass and Noah, like, we don't really know why we did that, we're really, really sorry, we know we shouldn't have done that. It's sort of their more baser animal instincts, like, coming out, because it was set up at the very beginning that they're talking about going on a date with Ash and Demetrius. So the idea of, like, more romantic stuff is stuck in their head, and their instincts took over from there. So that sort of brings up this theme, which I hadn't really done too much with up until this point. We've touched upon it every so often, where Cass would find her goat instincts coming in, Flint would find his squirrel instincts coming in. So that just sort of is, that's where I built in for this. So it isn't completely out of left field, but it is still enough. So that's like probably like one of the weakest parts of this entire chapter. I'm aware that it's a weak part. It was the best I had at the time. I just put it in and I moved on. Nothing much more to say here. It's just more of your typical horror element. I went back to like the dual color tones from Terror of the Jackal for the night scenes, partly just as a throwback, because now I've established that, okay, if I'm going to do a horror story, it's going to have these muted colors. But then the main focus elements are going to be in color, so that's why the bear's in color here. But honestly, like, the main reason I did the muted tones was because I originally was going to have anything the flashlight touched was going to be in regular full-on color because it's being fully illuminated. But when I did that on this page, Cass and Noah they popped right out of this page. So that spoils the reveal. If you were to go to this page, you wouldn't start reading from the first panel. Your eyes are immediately going to go to where there's the most vibrant, vivid, saturated colors. And that's going to spoil the reveal that Noah and Cass are in this closet. So I kept them these really desaturated flat colors so that they'd blend in, so that you wouldn't immediately go to those. And at that point I was committed to that idea, so that was the other reason why these colors are so different. This is a reference. I was just at the time of drawing this chapter, I was just reading Uzumaki by Junji Ito, a really great horror manga, and there was one chapter where springs grow out of a person. And in that chapter it was super, super horrific. Here it's only somewhat horrific because it's a teddy bear and not, a person. So I needed a way for the bear to get to actually be like a reasonably dangerous element for Toho that he could not easily escape from. And the idea of having, like, this bear on the floor, like, well, okay, it's crawling on the floor at like a mile per day. It's not going very fast. It's clearly not in great condition. How is this a threat? And when I read that chapter of Uzumaki where the springs come out of the guy's legs and he just is bouncing after the main characters in a chase scene, I'm like, okay, that's exactly what I want. So that's exactly what you're getting here, is that. And we get a proper transformation sequence in the comic. It's kind of out of order because of the page layout, but the way your eyes meant to flow across the page, and it's my fault if your eyes don't follow this particular trajectory because it's sort of counterintuitive. I tried to arrange them the best I could here, but yeah, I definitely I wouldn't blame anybody for reading this in a different order than what it was intended. So you're supposed to start from the left here, go all the way to the right, and then you're supposed to go straight down. So I drew her arm going down into this panel so that you're supposed to see this first, and then your eye tracks to the boot, to this panel, this way, and this is her final stage of her transformation over here. And then I could have done this a lot better. I should have drawn a totally separate frame here. It looks like she's shrunk to the size of the bear. They're not in the same panel. This is a close-up panel of a different shot of the floor. It's totally different. But I wanted to show the bear completely disintegrating so that you could see legitimately like Cammy is no longer functional and can't be salvaged. But Katsuko is actually bigger, taller than she was before. With the limited amount of space, the limited amount of pages I had, I tried to squeeze in as much satisfying transformation content as I could. But once again, my own attempt to write a cohesive story has gotten in the way of a good time. So post transformation Katsuko. So again, like I drew her really large head here. Like it's up from her perspective, looking down at these characters, so I could try to like show even in this cramped panel space that she is now bigger than the others are. And then here you see in full, like they're all able to fit on her back. And there we go, and this is all just falling action, a lot of just trying to really quickly explain what happened a minute ago because we didn't have time to explain it during the sequence. So, a lot of this might not make sense. I tried to use as little dialogue as possible to get across the concepts. We had that explanation earlier back over here of what the bears are meant to do. And the idea of, well, this isn't ideally going to work properly because Cammy's malfunctioning. Now we see that the DNA transfer goes the opposite direction, and will instead of the bear adopting DNA from the human will adopt DNA from the teddy bear, and that's how that works. And a friend helped me rewrite this. A friend told me that originally it was like Katsuko was really scolding them. She was really tearing into them, and I wrote that from a position where I was kind of angry. I was putting myself really heavily into Katsuko's perspective and just like, you really screwed up, guys. Because they really did. They really screwed up. Cass and Noah were even, like, I'm going to argue Cass and Noah were worse than Toho in this chapter. They completely ignored the entire mission objective and then went off to have a makeout session. Like, that's completely irresponsible. So, Katsuko's words were really, really harsh, though. It left on a really sour note, and a friend who read this ahead of release sort of pointed that out to me and said, hey, look, this really is... you could really rewrite this. And I thought about it and appreciated them telling me that. I went ahead and rewrote this so that it's a bit gentler. Katsuko knows that they're probably not thinking straight. They've got their own issues to think about, to worry about. And Katsuko knows that she was wrong for even dragging them along in this dangerous mission in the first place. So it was really they're all doing a mea culpa here. So no hard feelings, really, for the most part. So that is the end of Katsuko's chapter. And now we're going to get into the final chapter with Billy. This one, again, was the first chapter that I wrote, the first story that I wrote for this full chapter, and it was a very different kind of story than what I'd written before. It's very contemplative. It's very, like, this is like the first time that we don't really see a transformation happen when it looks like there's going to be one. And that was intentional. That was like the whole premise of this story is that just by becoming like someone else, you can't that you still can't put yourself in their headspace. Just because you're walking a mile in their shoes doesn't mean you really know what it's like to have always walked in their shoes, to have gone through exactly the same types of things. So this was a story that was pretty much about that concept. It was a way for me to finally figure out who Billy is. Kind of like Katsuko, we haven't seen a whole lot of Billy. We haven't really seen her, like her thought process. We haven't seen her make like any real decisions for the most part. She's just been along for the ride, like in the shrinking chapter, big world. Like she and Leon were shrunk down, and they just sort of had to deal with it. I had struggled for so long to figure out, well, what are Cass and Flynn's parents really thinking? What's it like to be Cass and Flynn's parents? To have kids who aren't really human anymore, who have all these different needs. Cass can't digest cow's milk anymore. She needs goat milk. Flint is refusing to wear clothing, and he's really small, so now we have to tailor all of his clothing to him, and he's refusing to wear even the stuff that we're tailoring specifically for him. And so all this stuff was there's a really deep pool to dive into here, and I would have to put the entire comic on pause to talk about all of it, to have stories about just the domestic lives of these characters. So, what could I give you just a taste of what it's like to be in Billy and Leon's shoes as the parents for the characters? So that's what this was, and I had to fight a lot of cliched motherly dialogue, and a lot of the most rewrites for this chapter over the course of the 5 years between when I wrote the first draft and when I drew and colored the pages. In those years, I would occasionally go back to this story and I would rewrite it, but almost 90% of the rewrites were these first 2 pages. This argument with Flint took so many different forms, and Billy had so many different tones, and I really just didn't like it. I'm like, she just sounds like such a stereotypical mother. My own mother doesn't talk to me like this. Hi, Mom, if you're listening. And so, like, how would an actual person really handle stuff like this? So that was, like, the biggest challenge for me when I was writing these. The way that I got around it for Cass, at least, was the Hellboy reference. So this takes place in 2020. The original Hellboy movie came out in the early 2000s, so Billy would have been like a teenager or in college, probably in college, watching the original Hellboy movie. It would have been a thing that she would have been into. And so, like, having this mother-daughter moment where Billy's trying to give Cass the best advice she can based on, like, the only other character, based on the only fictional character she can think of that has horns and is sympathetic, is Hellboy. So the idea of her using that reference, I made that a joke in the story. I made that a funny little thing to just amp up the tension between Cass and Billy, and also to show that Billy really is trying. She's really honestly doing the best she can, trying to relate to Cass, using really, like, the loosest frames of reference she can think of in media. So that's where that whole thing came from. And once I had that to sort of center their conversation around, that made the rest of this flow better. The reason that Cass and Noah mention the date in Katsuko's story is specifically so that Billy can use that as an in here for this conversation. So there was that little tangent of them talking about the date, which both of those references set up the next chapter when you see the date. And that's your one and only spoiler for the next chapter. But like that's where I'm talking about that, because that's where this came in here. So that allowed for me to set up the conversation, the way the conversation tracks here in this story, and in Katsuko's story, it allowed me to incorporate the whole, like, excuse for why Cass and Noah were in the closet, because they were talking about going on a date and they wanted somewhere private to just indulge in their resurfacing romantic urges. So, yep, that was that. Yeah, pretty much everything about this page. I really took a lot of time on the backgrounds. I'm trying to make this, like, this is one of the better backgrounds I've ever done for the series, and I really want to try and keep that quality up. Haven't done too much more like this since then. I'm going to try and make myself do that. It takes a lot of time, but the results are really worth it. I think this page looks pretty good. And so I'm constantly trying to up the bar for myself when it comes to atmosphere in the comic, so that you can really get a sense of place, a sense of time and feeling. And again, did that here with Morty's lab. This is exactly the same room as when Cass came to Morty to try and get cured the first time and he put her on a table. This is the very bottom of that device. I think I meant this to be one of the devices that comes out from the ceiling and extends the arms to hold on to implements and IV bags and stuff. So Morty is just trying to repair it here. I changed the look of the room in terms of the color tones. I added these bright, ugly blue fluorescent lights, and they're casting this blue-green pall on the room. Morty's even sicklier looking than he usually looks. It's really him in his element. And I tried to push the colors to really emphasize that. And as for the manor here, it's still it's just as bleak. It's an overcast day, but the grounds themselves are just this really. I wanted to give the idea that this is just a bleak place to grow up, especially alone. Morty's parents don't live here, and so he's just sort of alone with whatever servants that there might be, along with 13. I haven't actually decided if there's anyone else. There must be other people maintaining this building. This is a lot for just 13 to be responsible for. But 13 is, for the most part, his caretaker. And so this book here, the Corey Shive author, this is a loving reference to two other transformation-based webcomic authors, Corey Bing, who does the excellent comic Skin Deep, and Dan Shive, who does the equally excellent comic El Goonish Shive. If you are reading my comic and you somehow have not heard of either of those comics, absolutely go and read them, because they are, if you like my comic at all, you're going to love their stories. They have a much more expansive library of pages than I do, and I'm going to say it, they are better artists and better writers than I am, and I am inspired by pretty much them as ways to incorporate transformational content into a narrative, into deep characterization, and stuff like that. They set the bar for that. So here we go. From here on, this chapter pretty much is almost word for word the original draft, when I first sat down to write it. I adjusted things here and there, I think, but within the first week of writing this chapter, after a little bit of getting a little feedback from others, I pretty much had this conversation nailed down. Doing this repeat background, this calls back to pretty much the same shot from when, in chapter 3, when Cass goes to talk to Morty to change her back the first time. This is just an update from that panel. I made sure to include the extra banisters that I was missing in that panel. So this is also me redeeming myself for missing that one element. So now you're not just going to take a tumble off of here. So one thing I wish I had done was change the angle a little bit so that the camera's closer to the ground, so that Billy is higher in frame than Morty. Because there's this idea of a visual hierarchy if you're composing an image. The figure, the topmost figure is usually implied to be the figure with the most control over the scene. And Billy is the one with control in the scene. So I should have really, instead of being a perfect one-for-one redraw where Cass is here, I should have changed the angle so that Billy's head is closer to up here and this whole upper level is down here. And so you see Morty standing in the same spot, but in a diminished position. And I'm kicking myself ever since realizing I should have drawn the panel this way. But there's no way I'm redrawing a panel this detailed like that. It's done. We're done. But that's my one other big regret for this chapter. Is I should have thought to do that. But that's a little thing. Like if you're ever thinking about panel composition, that's another thing to keep in mind. Like the character that is higher in the frame is usually the one the audience is going to believe has the most implicit control in the scene. At the very least, I did have Morty in as a contrast to the scene in chapter 3. I did have Morty walk down the stairs to meet Billy on ground level so that he can talk with her not from a position of authority but as an equal. And since Morty is shorter than Billy is, not quite so much a perfect equal, because he is very regretful of what he did to Cass, and so he is pretty much going to let, if Billy or Leon ever tells him to do something, he's pretty much going to consider doing it because, yes, I really did something bad to your kids and I'm really sorry. What can I do to make up for that? So that's what the visual language, at least here, is implying. And a bit more with the visuals here. I tried my best to get a lot of detail into this study room. A lot of things are sort of implicit here, especially with these the cloths over the mantle portrait and this big armchair here. Just the idea of Morty really doesn't use a lot of these spaces. There's a lot of empty space in this house. It's built for a much larger family than himself. Like, his parents aren't here to use any of it. It's just him. So adding those little things into the scenery is my way of trying to really emphasize that stuff, because it hasn't become a major plot element in this point in the story, but it's important to show that so you can get a little bit more of, well, we're in Morty's house right now. What's it like to live in Morty's house? Let's take a look at that. So I'm really going to try to skip through all this. I could talk for ages about everything they talk about here. I wanted to start with something funny. You always want to, if you're going to do like a comedy drama, you always want to lead with a comedy. If it's going to become a deep story later, always give the audience something to laugh about, and give yourself something to laugh about. Give some kind of levity so that you can have some fun before you really, really get into the nitty-gritty of it. So the whole idea of like the nano war and Morty just being really just like taking a completely dispassionate approach to the idea of Cass and Flint being just like decomposed into just a pile of DNA. They're like, well, at least it'll be a glorious nano war. Yes, Billy, I know that's not the preferred outcome. The idea of Billy wanting to transform herself into a goat-squirrel hybrid, or whatever Morty can do for her so that she can really identify with her kids, that's sort of just, it came from not only from the idea of, well, every chapter needs to have a transformation in it. I'm going to turn it on its head here, so we're going to try to force a transformation, but then say, well, no, it would actually be a terrible idea to transform. I honestly, it's been so long since the idea solidified in my head, I honestly cannot remember the exact thought process that led me to this exact approach. I can only really say that yeah, just the entire idea of, like, I wanted to be extremely sober about this. I wanted to be like, if I were a parent and I really felt like I was failing my kids by not understanding what they're going through, I'm desperate. I've tried modifying their clothes for them. I've tried suggesting different things. I buy them the right kind of food so that they don't have any digestive issues. Like, I've adapted so much of my care routine for my kids, and yet I can't connect with them. I'm still doing things wrong, or I'm saying the wrong thing. So what if I actually became them? Would they have a buddy they could talk to now? That's kind of the gist of where Billy's at. So I built a lot of the dialogue around that. And the idea of this flashback, I was really worried that the flashback would be corny or melodramatic. So I tried to keep it as brief as possible. it's it's very difficult to not slip into a narrator tone when recalling a past event. Like there's a lot of flashbacks in TV and movies that I can't stand to watch because suddenly the character stops talking as if they're talking off the top of their head. They start talking as if they're reading from a book. And it really is jarring when that changes. And I did the best I could to change her dialogue in this to make it as off the cuff as possible. But like some of the phrases, like her face is brighter than the sun. I mean, like it's kind of corny, and I kind of don't like myself for writing stuff like that. But I couldn't think of any other way for her to describe it that wasn't just really plain. I wanted there to be at least some kind of like deep emotion here, poetic stuff. Like we're in her mind, her thoughts. So that's where that came from. So yeah, and it's sepia tone specifically because I have a rule that you're not allowed to find out what Cass's natural hair color is. I don't even know what Cass's natural hair color is. We've always seen human Cass with dyed hair, and so at age 3, Cass is not going to have Cass's parents aren't going to have dyed her hair, so we would end up seeing her normal hair color. So I made the flashback sepia tone specifically for that reason. And a reader did point out, well, it's obviously not super blonde, and it's obviously not black, so at least we have an idea for hair color. Yes, okay, you got me, but you still don't know exactly what the hair color is. And who's to say I'm not using artistic license, and maybe it is black, it's just a really, really, really shiny black, maybe, or something. I don't know. I claim artistic license. Let's move on. Billy is in silhouette here specifically because I wanted to just change it up. And I was getting tired of drawing the same faces. So there was occasional shots where the characters are in silhouette or something. But Morty's face goes into silhouette here. I didn't write this into the script. This was a very last minute thing. As I was thumbnailing the page, I thought, well, Morty should have a moment of temptation. He should have a moment where he thinks his old style of thinking, which is, ooh, I can transform someone. How would I do it? And so lapsing his head back into the glowy-eyed silhouette from the earlier days of the comic was a really quick way to show that as well as bring it in through dialogue. And then calling back to that moment in the chapter 5, I Abomination, when we first see their parents come home and they see Cass and Flint's animal forms for the first time. Getting Morty's perspective for the first time on that scene. It was serendipitous that Morty happened to be in the room for that. That was just I obviously wasn't planning this chapter all the way back when I was drawing chapter 5, so it was great to have that scene that I could go back to and think, well, now we're going to get Morty's perspective of what he saw when Cass and Flint's parents showed up and hugged them and immediately accepted them. That heartwarming moment. Morty has not had a heartwarming moment with his parents like that, at least not for a very, very, very long time. So getting that contrast in there and using that to not only inform you guys like of what kind of life Morty leads, like also showing Morty's perspective, but then using that to inform Billy's perspective and giving her the idea of, look, you really are trying hard to be a mother, and the fact that you're trying so hard for your kids and you're not giving up and you're willing to go to this extent where you would actually mutate your own body just so you could try to have some kind of extra connection with your kids. How many parents would do that? Yeah, it's an extreme decision and you shouldn't do it, but you still went there in your head and you were willing to go there in real life. That really shows how much you deeply, deeply love your kids. You're doing the right things already. You don't need to doubt yourself as much as you're doubting yourself. And so using all those different threads of Morty's perspective and and all that. It just came together really, really well here. I just really like this chapter a lot. And these panels are, yeah, I think pretty much most of this page is word for word the original ending to the script. It's great when you have an ending you can really just say that's the ending. Like there's this cannot end any other way. This is excellent. I'm patting myself on the back here. This is the perfect way for this chapter to end. Knowing where you're going to end your chapter and the way you're going to end it, the emotion of it, the emotion of the scene, and what the characters are going to have decided, where they're going to be. It really helps write the entire rest of the story, and that seems pretty obvious, but it's really easy when writing a story to not really think about what you're going to do for the ending. So that was just a really great thing for me to have, the knowledge of this is exactly how we're going to end up. So maybe like I have the beginning decided and I have the ending decided, but the middle's a bit shaky. I can at least write the middle portion and rewrite it, but I at least have that destination that I'm still going to get to. I'm not going to lose my focus. I really, really lost focus during the class warfare arc, and I talked at length about that in the previous commentary, so I won't dredge too much of it up here, but this will be the last point I talk about for the commentary. I lost focus with class warfare because I didn't know where I was going to end. I wasn't going to close the school down entirely, I don't think. I don't think I was ever originally setting out to close the school down. I just wanted to shrink Jen into a child and have the class rebel and have that be resolved by our main cast coming together. That was pretty much it. But I lost the thread of, exactly how are the kids going to do that, and exactly what is Ken's plan going to end up being like. What's the end result of his plan? Is he going to cure his cancer? Like, is he going to, is something else going to happen? Are they not even going to let him build the machine and fire it off at all? Like, I didn't have any of that in mind as I was writing the chapter, and that's what took so long. That's what really hurt me and destroyed my confidence for so long, was the idea that I just became unmoored. I lost faith in where I was taking the story. But even through all of that, I had already written this chapter. I had written this chapter in 2015, so like, I knew that one chapter after class warfare, I was going to have something. I was going to get back to that. So as I was finally figuring out what class warfare part 2's ending was going to be, the closer I got to that ending, the easier it was for me to pepper that ending with elements from the Mother Trilogy to set up what's going to happen in these pages. So there was at least that, and the more I was able to do that, the more confident I got. Again, I built my confidence back up, and I'm happy to say, and knock on wood, that as of now, I'm just finishing up the next chapter, Chapter 13, Double Date, and I have the rest of the chapters of Phase 3 in various stages of scripting, and I have more of an idea of what each chapter is about, where each chapter is going to take us, than I ever did for this many chapters in advance before. Like Phase 2, I didn't have a full plan for that. Those were all supposed to be episodic, one-and-done stories, so I didn't really have an idea when I wrote the first chapter of Phase 2 what the last chapter of Phase 2 was even going to be. That wasn't there. But from the very beginning here, from when I started writing Class Warfare Part 2, I had ideas for what the rest of the chapters were going to be, and that's been so much more helpful. And now that I'm done with Class Warfare and I've gotten all that stuff done on paper, as messy as it is, it's set. We know what's happened, it's established, and I can move on, and we can all just continue enjoying these stories. That's the headspace I'm at right now, and I hope I can keep that up for the next 4 chapters, because I had so much more fun making the Mother Trilogy than I did making Class Warfare Part 2. So much more fun. And I hope it's come out in this commentary too, like the tone I've taken with this and I had so much joy in making this. I finally got back the idea of, well, what am I making comics for in the first place? To have fun. I'm having fun making them. You're having fun reading them. I hope. I really, really hope. Otherwise, you're not listening to me ramble on this hour and 9-minute commentary. But that's where we're at now, and I really hope that I can continue to keep up in the ante, writing wise, art wise. I really want to make Phase 3 the best comics I've ever made. And if this chapter is any indication, I might have a chance of doing that. I've just got to keep trying, and I hope I can keep this energy level up, because if I can, then maybe I can make this really good for you. So thank you for listening to this commentary. Thank you for reading UTC as always. And I'll see you next time we've got a chapter finished.